And call the Senate to order. The Sergeant at Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, Senators, this evening we are very pleased on this Martin Luther King Day Jr. Celebration Day of Service. Rabbi Yeshel Schaffer, did I say that close? Formerly of the Pikesville Jewish Community in Pikesville, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the 11th District. Members, please rise for the invocation.
Thank you, Senate President Ferguson and Senator Heddleman, for having me back. A little under a year ago, I was here on President's Day, which was such a special celebration. You do a very unique job making that day special. So when Senator Heddleman extended the invitation to come back, I had mixed emotions. I couldn't predict a year later that my family's destiny would actually be away from the state of Maryland. Thank God I've joined a beautiful and ambitious team of educators in Miami and Florida. We're building a new school called the Jewish Leadership Academy. But Senator Heddleman insisted, while we're still living in Maryland, that I join you for this one last time. And so I'm immensely grateful to be offering the prayer this evening. And I wanted to share three reasons why I'm grateful. Number one, the opportunity to express some gratitude publicly. In Jewish lore, gratitude is very much part of prayer. So much so that during the private silent prayer, there's one moment where everyone joins together in the synagogue, and that's when we express the prayer of gratitude. Everyone has to recite the prayer of gratitude themselves. And so gratitude very much is part of prayer. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to bring my two oldest children, Bensi and Amalia. They've never been in a Senate House, let alone the Maryland Senate, so they're very excited. And it's wonderful to be able to show them what it looks like to dedicate your life to public service. I'm sure this will be an evening that they'll remember, especially because they get to stay up after bedtime. And finally, of course, today we remember and we pay homage to the great Dr. Martin Luther King. What an incredible honor to offer a prayer on a day where we remember a man who taught us how to pray. And so I ask you to join me in a prayer of gratitude and introspection. God, creator of the heavens and earth, creator of humanity, who made us all in your image, may you guide this important body and give the leaders of Maryland the wisdom and the humility to collaborate in creating laws and policies that will make people's lives better. Today we remember and honor the memory of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In seeking inspiration for our prayer, we turn to Dr. King's lesser-known speeches. We found his words prophetic and as moving as ever. Upon receiving the Nobel Prize in 1964, Dr. King addressed the Nobel Committee and the Norwegian government and shared the following very relevant reflection. He said, "In spite of our spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There's a sort of poverty of the spirit which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers. O Lord, almost 60 years later, something basic is still missing from our lives. Dr. King's words ring true in our ears and humbles our prayers today. 60 years later, with all the progress, having invented vaccines and created artificial intelligence, we now carry with us in the palm of our hands ways for us to meaningfully connect with each other. It has never been easier for us to see each other face to face from across the world. We've achieved more, conquered more, innovated more, and yet we still feel so divided. God, please keep clear before us at all times that we and all human beings are created in your image. Remind us daily that life is to be celebrated and cherished, the world to be both conquered and cultivated, and humanity is to be loved and lifted up. As the members of this body begin their important work this evening, we are reminded of the words of one of the most magnanimous biblical characters, whose story synagogues across the world will read about in the coming weeks. I'm speaking, of course, of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. When Moses spent dusk to dawn caring for his people, guiding them and responding to their needs, Jethro intervenes and tells his son-in-law, what you are doing is not right. Seek out capable individuals who fear God, trustworthy individuals who spurn corruption, set them, organize them, get them to care for the people. God Almighty, I've lived in Maryland for over 5 blessed years. Our family's had a child here, we've watched our children grow here, and we've lived through a pandemic here. We've seen firsthand the worthiness of many people in Maryland and their commitment to doing what's right and good. We've witnessed the ability of many people in the leadership of this great state, and we are here to tell you, oh God, they are organized, they are capable. We've heard the sage advice of Jethro and are inspired by the charge of Dr. King. And we remain convinced that the people standing before me won't rest until they have made Maryland a better, healthier, and safer place for all. Bless us, we pray, to be dreamers and to be believers and to be builders who take the aspirations of our children and create a society and the opportunities that should transform those dreams into reality. On April 3rd, 1968, in the Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, less than 24 hours before he was murdered, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to a gathering of striking sanitation workers. I conclude our prayer tonight on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day with his words. The question before you tonight is not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor. The question is not if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to me? The question is if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question. Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness, let us stand with a greater determination, and let us move on in these wonderful days, these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. Thank you, God, for giving us leaders, both current and past, and for giving us wisdom, health, humility, and inspiration. And let us say, Amen.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 11th District.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just thank you very much, Rabbi. I'm very proud to have represented you these past 5 years. I'm sorry we're losing you to Florida, but I know that you're going to share your wisdom there and make the world a better place from down south, and they could use the help. So I thank you and welcome your children and ask that the prayer tonight be journalized.
Without objection, we will certainly journalize the Rabbi's wonderful remarks this evening and thank him for his work and service in Maryland and welcome his wonderful, beautiful children here visiting us today. Welcome to the Senate. Hope you had a great time seeing your dad work. Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Let's see. Do we have, has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 43 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. Do we have any introductions? Yes, Chair recognizes Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I am pleased to be introducing this evening a former colleague of many of us who served in the House of Delegates before coming over to the Senate. Our friend and former colleague, State Delegate Sam Aurora, is with us this evening. Sam, stand up there. So
welcome. We were in that class of 10 together. Class of 10. It was a good class. Good class. Excellent. Any other introductions tonight? Let's do. Could we do pages now, because we have a great presentation later from the senator from the 41st district. Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd district.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to welcome our student pages for the week. First, we have David Klein from Baltimore County, from a resident in District 11 and a student at Towson High School. Next, we have Henry Miller from Queen Anne's County, District 36, a student at Queen Anne's County High School.
Welcome.
Next, we have Joja Okra from Montgomery County, District 14, a student at Damascus High School. And last, we have Manasi Tanakela from Frederick County, District 4, a student at Urbana High School.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Great to have our pages back in full form, not the virtual program. We are fully back. It's nice. It's great. Welcome. Have a great week this week. You're going to enjoy it. And a special night this evening. A couple quick notes before we jump into business today. First is, I hope for those of you that were able to see, our new comptroller was sworn in today, which was a very exciting event and wonderful, great swearing in. It was a very, very nice ceremony, perfect weather, couldn't beat it. That brings me to the next point, which is the next inauguration, which is going to be a much bigger event, and it is going to be a very, very, very packed day. And so the most important thing, if there's nothing else to take away, is that we must start session at 9:15 on Wednesday, 9:15 on Wednesday. So it's early. The traffic is going to be less than pleasant, so make accommodations to try and add a 30-minute window to any drive time. It's going to be very, very, very packed. So more details to come. You'll get a memo. Each member will get a memo of all of the different pieces of the day, but we'll go back and forth, the House and back, and swear in, and then we'll go outside. And so it'll be busy, but it's going to be a big affair. And also, thank you to members for accommodating some of the decorations that are on the buildings. We know it was a little bit last minute. Thanks for understanding on Friday. We got some late word, so we make it work. We make it work here in the Senate. All right. Any other piece of business before we jump in? Just get a few things out of the way before we hand it over to our wonderful speech tonight. All right. If not, we'll waive the reading of the journal from the previous legislative day. First order of business is introduction of bills. This is calendar number 5. The clerk will read the bills.
Senate Bill 141, Senator Elfreth, income tax, subtraction modifications for adoption expenses, alterations, budget and taxation.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. We've got bond initiatives, number 2. Clerk will read the bond initiatives.
Number 1, Senator Stallings, Super the Soul, budget and taxation. Number 2, Senator Beidel, the ARC, Central Chesapeake Region at Linthicum, budget and tax. Number 3, Senator Beidel, renovation of the GFWC Women's Club at Linthicum, budget and tax.
All right, bond initiatives are in. We're getting the bill count up, so we're getting there. Drafts, I know the drafts are working really hard this weekend. All right, let's do this. Before we're going to finish with the senator from Baltimore City. Let's see if there are any announcements, delegation announcements, committee announcements, anything for tomorrow morning. Chair Finance? No committee? Nope. B&T? Nope. JPR? Any delegations? Caucuses? No? All right. Slow day for Tuesday. All right, let's go ahead. As is the incredible honor that we have the opportunity to do each year, one of our own gives a reflection and thought about this important day, this day of service, honoring an individual who represents a movement, who represents a change of the world. And we are so fortunate to have a member of this body who experienced it her entire life growing up in the midst of it, whose father was a remarkable leader, and who she learned from every single day, and learned the lessons of a lifetime that many would dream to have had. So without further ado, would like to welcome up for the Martin Luther King Jr. address today, Senator from the 41st District, if senators will excuse, Senator Jill P. Carter.
I'm not used to being in this space. It's a true honor to be before you tonight on such an incredible day, and a true pleasure to be in front of this body when I have words that are not in part of debate. I have some incredible guests today that I'd like to introduce in just a second. Beginning with my amazing sister, who comes here in the spirit of my mother and entire family, and as the representative of the three of us. So Judy Carter Cox to my left, her amazing husband who has become my brother, the Honorable Sylvester B. Cox, my life partner for the last 9 years, Norman Johnson, Dr. Reginald Hall, and I'll get to him later when I introduce the people that he is accompanying. And I also have my staff for this session, Mr. Charles Bird, my Chief of Staff, and Chad Leo, my Legislative Director. It's truly heartwarming for me to be able to introduce the next guests that are in the gallery. Some of you read in the news early in the summer of the tragic killing of 15-year-old Nikayla Strader, and I have met with and been working with their family, her family, on some potential legislation for the future, and also just so honored that they came tonight for this Martin Luther King speech. And so in the gallery is Donyette McCray, Nikayla's mother, Taverla Strader, Renard Parks, Renette Jarvis, Danielle Jarvis, right up there in the left. Now, this next two announcements of guests is just incredibly thrilling for me personally, and frankly, it will be when you hear who they are, to everyone in this chamber, especially the women. And so, without further ado, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Honorable Iris Reeves and Honorable Vera Hall. I haven't told you who they are yet, but I'm about to. And so, oftentimes people ask me, how did I get involved in politics? And I don't think that it was anything conscious, but the first two women that I knew from the beginning of my life were became Councilwoman Vera P. Hall and Iris G. Reeves. They happened to be my mother's best friends, but they were also among the first women and black women in politics in Maryland. When I first met Mrs. Hall, she was an educator at my elementary school, Hilton Elementary, number 21. She went on to become the first black teacher in a white school in Little Italy, so she integrated those Baltimore schools at the time. She elevated to become the Assistant State Superintendent for Education in Maryland, and the first black woman to be the head of the Maryland State Democratic Party, the chair of the Maryland State Democratic Party. She went on to be a councilwoman, and after that she was the government relations expert for Morgan State University. So if anybody's been here long, she might have lobbied you back in the day for money from Morgan. Iris Reeves is the wife of Norman V.A. Reeves, who was on the council, and she assumed his position and then ran for office in her own right. She was the head of the chair of the education committee for the council, and both of these women have had an indelible imprint in my life, and so if I do anything awful, they have nothing to do with it, okay? They have been examples of grace and poise and brilliance and intelligence my entire life, and I look to them all the time as the example of how to be as a woman and as an elected person. So again, can we say thank you? Okay, so there's a hole here, but I got it. So, Mr. President, colleagues, family, and friends, without further ado, I want to, again, thank you for this great honor, not just to serve with you, but to address you tonight. Thank you for lending me your ears for 1/3 of an hour. If I say it like that, you'll know it's not going to be long and I might be able to keep your attention. As a 1960s baby, I was born into the belly of the civil rights struggle. My father dedicated his life to the struggle for human rights and liberation. So as a little girl, when I first learned of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I thought, oh, I like him. He's like my father. He's like Daddy. Of course, little did I know, Martin Luther King was a national figure of prominence, but in my mind, I thought he must be good because he's in the same fight as my father. Today, we honor Dr. King, who was born on January the 15th, 1929, and assassinated April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was but 39 years old. We remember Dr. King as a hero and an iconic civil rights leader through his speeches and writings as one of the most eloquent and inspirational orators that has ever lived. But that was not the majority opinion when he was alive. According to Gallup polls, Dr. King's favorability ranged between 63% at its height and 44% among Americans. 39% gave him the absolute least favorable rating possible in a Gallup poll in all years. Even more shocking, 43% of Americans expressed no sadness about his death at the time, and some suggested he brought it on himself. His favorability was substantially better within the Black community, though. Coincidentally, I've learned over my life that while my father has seemed to be revered in his death, he too suffered the same unpopularity for the work that he did when he was alive. He wasn't going to win any popularity contest with the political establishment for his unrelenting activism for fair housing. In particular, he was called too radical, and he was blocked by political elites from heading the Community Action Agency. The synergy between the civil rights movement and my reverence for my father became a part of my DNA at an early age. So colleagues, if my words come off a little strong, they are not intended in any way to offend, but merely to convey my truth. Like my dad and Dr. King, I'd rather be free than popular. The greatness of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Walter Percival Carter, all freedom fighters, liberationists, sheroes, heroes, all true leaders, is their willingness to take principled stands even when it's unpopular. To take principled stands when their lives and their livelihoods are on the line. It takes courage to confront political establishment and risk retaliation. No great leader ever surrendered principled stance on behalf of the people for fear of losing an election. Not one. The essence of King's legacy is his courage and revolutionary challenge to an America far from a more perfect union, still controlled by a white supremacist status quo. King was advised against making public his opposition to the Vietnam War because he was told it would weaken mainstream support for the civil rights movement. Yet on April the 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year to the day before his death, that's exactly what King did. King said, "As I walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. But they ask, and rightly so, but what about Vietnam? They ask, isn't it the case that our own nation is using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about changes it wanted? Their questions hit home, and I knew I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government." Of all his speeches, this remains the least remembered because it summoned Americans to protest the Vietnam War. Today, we are confronted by the rise of weaponized racism, The bloody insurrection just 2 years ago in our nation's capital evidenced a modern-day evil fueled by disinformation, misinformation, and a white supremacist ideology. As Dr. King urged immediate activism to answer the immoral Vietnam War, so too must we summon our collective efforts to combat the scourge of anti-patriotic extremist assaults on our blessed democracy. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King explains the more subtle evil of the silence of our friends, in contrast to the overt acts of hatred from clearly defined enemies. He writes, "I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable on another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. A shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than the absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection," wrote Dr. King. These more hard-hitting speeches of Dr. King are rarely highlighted in modern culture. Their omission is not accidental. These kinds of statements are not statements of a dreamer, but of a radical revolutionary willing to put everything on the line for the liberation of his people and in patriotic pursuit of a more perfect America. Could it be that celebrating the more revolutionary aspects of King's legacy might make one unpopular today as King was in his day? If we are looking to authentically honor Dr. King, we must ask ourselves, am I looking for clout and validation, or am I willing to be unpopular, alienated, and made a target of the status quo? We must ask, are we confronting the forces of racism and oppression in the way that Dr. King did, or are we just keeping up appearances? Are we ready to talk about that check? Are we ready to talk about that check America owes black people that Dr. King mentions in his famous I Have a Dream speech? Or are we just too comfortable reducing that speech to a one-liner about people being judged by the content of their character? These are the questions we must ask ourselves if we are serious about honoring Dr. King and not merely a whitewashed version of him. Here in Maryland, before I conclude, and it's coming, I must talk about honoring King's legacy in this great state of Maryland, where we are so fortunate to live and serve in the wealthiest state, in the wealthiest nation in the world. Our state boasts the highest median income in the nation. Yet, in my city, Baltimore City, in 2022, more than 30% of our children lived in poverty. We accept as progress a collaboration of citizens that dole out money to children who are products of a failed education and economic and social system that have been relegated to begging on our streets. Our children deserve an opportunity to learn, earn diplomas and certificates, and earn a living wage, not squeegees. We also come to accept the ravages of large volume arms dealers, profiteers inundating our streets with weapons of war with no accountability. Too many of our youth grow up in what Dr. King called the triple ghetto of race, poverty, and human misery. In this wealthy state of Maryland, we've been slow walking raising the minimum wage. Like Dr. King said, it's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than to guarantee an adequate education or a living wage. Nevertheless, we have a moral obligation to do so. We know that voting is the great equalizer, yet in 2023, voting rights across this country are still on the line. Let's not ignore our neighboring states like Virginia, where there are overt efforts to suppress the votes of people of color. We are still in this thing together, and we must offer what support we can. As King related, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality and tied in a single garment of destiny. Not only has the John Lewis Voting Rights Act stalled, but right here in Maryland, there are some who are actively seeking to abridge the right of the people to elect judges that preside over the most important legal matters of their lives. They want to do away with judicial elections altogether. But colleagues, last time I checked, the judiciary is still one of the 3 branches of government in this state. I love it when Dr. King said, and excuse my imitation, but I've been imitating it for a long time because it's one of my favorite lines, "What we say to America is be true to what you said on paper." I love that. And I say the same thing when it comes to our Constitution and our branches of government and protecting all voting rights for all people and preserving elections. Principle over popularity. It may well be unpopular, though I can't imagine why, that we treat children like children even when they act up, even when they commit bad acts. If we hesitate to entertain this as a real issue, hesitate to consider the efficacy of that, to dismiss this concern out of hand, especially knowing the failure of our education system, the unequal law enforcement along color lines, it's something that we have to consider if we want to be right, and even if it's unpopular amongst some people. It's the principled thing to do. It may well be unpopular to honor the Fourth Amendment and prohibit searches based on odor of now legalized marijuana, but it certainly is constitutional and the right thing to do. It may well be unpopular to allow persons that have paid their debt to society to enjoy the privileges of full citizenship, including serving on juries, but it is certainly fair and right. Dr. King said, "The greatness of America is the right to stand up for right." That's why I implore us to do that. A few years ago, Marianne Williamson wrote a book called The Politics of Love. Now, Marianne Williamson in the political arena is often met with jeers and chuckles, but I'm not laughing, because I believe that that is within the spirit of Dr. King. Dr. King condemned power without compassion, might without morality, strength without sight. When we possess power without compassion, we have inequity. We have unequal education. We have disparate substandard living conditions. We have lead-poisoned children. We have a school-to-prison pipeline. We have an unjust criminal justice system. We have the criminalization of poverty. We have the criminalization of certain people while we create a legal structure to allow others to profit for the same behavior. Let us not be guilty of power without compassion. Let us be more concerned about the next generation than the next election. In Dr. King's prophetic words, only light can drive out darkness, only love can conquer hate. I submit to you that love and truth are the same. If we are not willing to be disruptors of inequity, we bear false witness to the truth. If we are not willing to sacrifice popularity for principle, we do a disservice to the legacy of Dr. King. But more importantly, if we fail in our sworn duty to our children, as our state constitution implores us to do, ourselves and our posterity, we fall short of our constitutional mandate. May the radical, revolutionary spirit of Dr. King be always with us. May I ask you to turn and tell your neighbor, principles over popularity. I leave you with love, peace, and truth, and principles over popularity. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking at you the whole time.
Thank you so much, Senator. Never would we doubt that the senator from the 41st District will push us to be our better selves. Be our better selves, always, always. And it's so wonderful that your family could join us today. Thank you all so much for being here. I know the senator was so thrilled that you all were going to be able to join us. It means the world to her, and thank you for being here with us to celebrate this important moment. And honored guests for being here as well. Yes, we have our state's attorney, Brave Boy, from Prince George's County here today. And we have do we have the treasurer? Is the treasurer still here? Oh, he's hidden. And, excellent, welcome. We have the treasurer, Derek Davis. Welcome. It's great to see you all. Before I forget, we need to journalize with the chair of finance.
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the remarks shared by the senator be journalized.
Without objection, we will certainly journalize the senator's remarks, and we thank her again for her thoughtfulness. I know a lot went into it, and it was just an honor to have you address the chamber this evening. Thank you, Senator, genuinely. All right, I think that will do it for this evening. We got a big week ahead. Let's go ahead and do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 43 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Tuesday, January 17th at 10 a.m.
Without objection, 10 a.m. tomorrow. See you all. Stay safe.